This is a follow-up to our earlier video about Donald Trump attempting to illegally fire a Federal Reserve governor. Even the conservative Wall Street Journal is panicking, sounding the alarm about how dangerous this is to the American economy, both in the present and in the future. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, so the Wall Street Journal did a deeper dive on the implications of what Trump tried to do, which we discussed in an earlier video. It says, uncharted waters, Trump's attempt to take charge at the Fed. The president's intention to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook could give him sway over the central bank's resetting power. Donald Trump's attempts to fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook is the most dramatic step yet in his effort to take control of the independent central bank and its vast authority over interest rates. Trump has, for months, demanded that the Federal Reserve lower rates to boost the economy, making housing more affordable and lower the cost of servicing the national debt. He has castigated Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell for not moving sooner to cut them. By replacing Cook, he could add enough votes to the 7-member Board of Governors to potentially outvote Powell and move interest rates in his preferred direction. Quote, to the extent that Fed independence stands for anything, it stands for the idea that monetary policy should not be made by the whims of the sitting president. Peter Conti Brown, a financial and legal scholar at the University of Pennsylvania, said late Monday night, quote, if we allow this to become the norm, then this is the end of Federal Reserve independence as we know it. Trump's decision to remove Cook set up a clash over how much power the president has at the central bank. Cook said late Monday night that Trump has no authority to fire her and that she would continue her job. Her lawyer, Abby Lowell, said Trump's, quote, demands lack any proper process, basis, or legal authority. We will take whatever actions are needed to prevent his attempted illegal action. I want to stop there for just a moment because this is extremely important. As I mentioned in the previous video, Trump has, in his attempts to flex executive power in a truly unprecedentedly authoritarian way, has not often come up against roadblocks. More often than not, people and institutions have simply rolled over for him out of fear or apathy or perhaps some attempt at calculation. It doesn't matter if it's other countries or if it's universities or if it's former FBI Director Christopher Wray. Not always, but very often, people just roll over, which is incredibly dangerous because it creates the incentive in Trump to continue to do these sorts of things. So for Lisa Cook to basically give Trump the finger and say, no, I don't recognize your authority to fire me. You don't have the basis to fire me, and I'm going to continue to go and do my job, regardless of what you want, is incredibly important. And more people, institutions, and countries need to start standing resolute in the face of Trump's attempts to bully them in an authoritarian and very often unlawful way. So kudos to her. Trump's move comes at a delicate moment. The Fed has held interest rates steady at between 4.25 and 4.5% for 5 straight policy meetings so far this year, largely out of concerns that tariffs would maintain upward pressure on inflation, currently above the Fed's 2% target. But in a speech last week, Powell, citing risks to the labor market, began to shift federal officials toward a possible interest rate cut as soon as next month. So, as a reminder, the Fed has to balance has to balance inflation and the labor market, unemployment. These are the two primary metrics that it has to juggle at any time, and it tries to wield interest rates to avoid inflation or a crumbling labor market, right? So you may recall that Donald Trump fired the Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner just a couple of months ago, or rather a month ago. God, time is it's a blur these days, because there were revisions to the labor reports from previous months indicating that the labor market under Trump is actually pretty damn weak compared to what it was under President Biden, with downward revisions of like 258,000. And the July labor report was incredibly underwhelming as well. And so this has created another problem for Jerome Powell, because when you have high inflation and you have increasing unemployment or a weak labor market, it creates the conditions potentially for stagflation, okay? So with all that in mind, Powell's got his hands full. We'll continue. Meanwhile, candidates to succeed Powell as Fed chair when his term expires in May are angling for Trump's favor in public and private. The resignation this month of Fed Governor Adriana Kugler, appointed by President Biden, already gave Trump a vacancy on the board, to which he has nominated a close advisor, Stephen Moran. Moran now awaits Senate confirmation. And I was listening to a CNBC report earlier today, and they tend to be pretty conservative, relatively speaking, with respect to fiscal and economic policy. The analysts there are like, Moran is a Trump loyalist. So whatever Trump says, Moran will vote accordingly. And what we're seeing is the increasing partisanship of the board structure. And that's not good, especially because, again, you want the monetary and fiscal policy of the United States to be as independent from politics as humanly possible, right? The two governors whom Trump appointed during his first term, Michelle Bowman and Christopher Waller, voted against the committee's decision last month to hold rates steady, arguing for a cut instead. Board members vote on interest rates alongside 5 independently appointed Reserve Bank presidents. But more Trump-aligned governors on the board could mean more momentum toward rate cuts that Trump has pressed for. While the immediate effect on the pace of the size of interest rate cuts is unclear, of interest rate cuts is unclear, the longer-term effect is more significant. By getting more control of the Fed, Trump could influence the direction and level of interest rates for the rest of his term. The immediate effect of cuts could be a boost to spending and growth, but the longer-term risk is higher inflation if Trump's appointees go on to hold interest rates lower than economic conditions warrant. Okay? The institutional implications could reverberate for years. Historically, the president's only direct influence on monetary policy has been through nominating governors. Once in place, he could not direct how they voted. By showing that a sufficiently determined president can find a way to remove a Fed governor mid-term, Trump's move would effectively curb the independence of the central bank. Over the long run, a less independent Fed might be slower to respond to price pressure and result in a higher inflation rate and thus higher long-term interest rates. Quote, "It's a dark day for the central bank," said David Wilcox, an economist at Bloomberg Economics and the Peterson Institute for International Economics, who previously directed research for the Fed board. Quote, "This is going to cause tremors in the foundation that underpins monetary policy in the United States, and those tremors will be felt in financial markets domestically and around the world." Legislators responded along party lines. Quote, "This is blatantly illegal, and Trump knows it," said Representative Don Bayer, a Democrat. Quote, "Trump is putting our financial system at risk over bogus claims of fraud, an offense of which he himself was convicted." And I point that out in our first video, which is that the irony is that Donald Trump is claiming as cause to fire Lisa Cook allegations of the very crime that he committed. So Donald Trump was convicted of fraud. Lisa Cook has not been charged with fraud, let alone convicted. Merely allegations have been made against her, not even by authorities. Donald Trump is just simply making the allegation against her. And he's like, that means you can't be trusted to be a Federal Reserve governor. Well, then by that logic, Trump should resign the presidency because he was alleged by federal prosecutors. They brought him to trial. They made the case successfully, and he was convicted. So I think Bayer is right to point that out. Rick Scott of Florida said, Republican senator, said Trump is, quote, "doing the right thing to hold people accountable, protect American families, and restore trust in the Fed." Both the central bank and the economy at large are entering unknown territory. Presidents have periodically criticized the Fed since its founding in 1913 and attempted to sway its decisions. But especially in recent decades, politicians have broadly recognized that an independent central bank is important because it has a free hand to make unpopular moves that preserve the economy's long-run health. When it established the Fed, Congress said the board members can only be fired, quote, "for cause, not for policy differences." No president has ever tried to fire a Fed board member or chair, and no president has used allegations of misconduct to remove any official with for-cause protection in over a century, said Lev Menand, a Columbia University law professor. Quote, "We're in pretty uncharted waters," he said. The Supreme Court, in a May order, appeared to offer the Fed protections that would bar Trump from firing Powell or any of the other 6 governors unless it is for cause. But the term itself is open to interpretation, Menand said. And again, I referenced this in the previous video, which is the Supreme Court gave Donald Trump extraordinary latitude to just fire the members of so-called independent agencies at will, except they made a carve-out for the Fed for purely spurious reasons. Now, I'm glad that they did. I would have preferred that they said, no, you have to fire, if you're going to fire an independent agency executive or member, it needs to be for cause. I think they should be fireable, but only for cause, right? I think that that's a good middle ground. That's a good negotiation. You don't want to totally insulate them from doing a shitty or negligent job, but you don't want to make them subject to the president's whims, okay? The Supreme Court tried to give as much Trump of a win as possible, but they recognized that it would be incredibly dangerous, probably for their finances as well as the finances of the country, if the Fed were effectively at-will employees of the president. So they came up with bullshit, spurious reasons to make this exemption. But who knows? It's possible that they'll validate Trump's decision. In subtler ways, Trump has already moved to reshape the Fed. After lashing out at Powell over the renovation of Fed buildings in Washington, he stopped by the construction site in July, becoming the first president to visit the Fed in nearly 20 years. There, he argued with Powell over the construction's cost, asserting a kind of executive oversight of the project in front of television cameras. Some advocates for Fed independence have hoped that by giving the White House its way on issues like bank regulation, the bank might dodge interference in its interest rate decisions. But, quote, appeasement hasn't worked. Fed analyst Derek Tang of the firm L.H. Meyer wrote in a note to clients late Monday night. Trump repeated allegations first made by Bill Putte, the leader of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, that in 2021, Cook sought mortgages on two properties, one in Michigan, the other in Atlanta, and described both as her primary residence in papers submitted 14 days apart. Pulte said he would submit the information to the Justice Department in a criminal referral. It is unclear if what Trump alleges meet the definition of cause, generally interpreted to mean dereliction of duty or malfeasance. Cook hasn't been charged, much less convicted. The alleged mortgage fraud took place before she became a governor in 2022. So, folks, it says something that the conservative Wall Street Journal is freaking out about this because they recognize this is a sister publication of Fox News, okay? They tend to be more pro-Republican, pro-right, and yes, despite their criticisms of Trump, certainly more pro-Trump than pro-Biden or pro-Kamala Harris. They're freaking out about this because this could not only have disastrous implications in the short term, but the long term as well. And they're probably also thinking, holy shit, this is a Pandora's box that if a Democrat, oh my God, it's even worse than Trump, if a Democrat were to become president, they could assume the sort of control over the Federal Reserve that Trump is doing here. I mean, think about Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren's ran for president. She didn't win, but during the Biden administration, especially towards the end, she was very critical of Jerome Powell and the Fed's, decisions with respect to interest rates. And she publicly criticized them. Can you imagine how the Wall Street Journal is almost certainly thinking, Jesus Christ, what if there is a President Elizabeth Warren or a President Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez who would be able to use the Trump precedent to set interest rates and to set fiscal monetary policy in a way which benefits progressives or the Democratic Party? That's probably why they're freaking out, to say nothing of the fact that I'm sure they think Trump is an idiot. But, folks, it says something that we're starting to see this sort of backlash. And actually, while we're talking, I am curious if Jerome Powell has issued a statement on Lisa Cook yet. As far as I can tell, there is still no official statement by Jerome Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve. But I also just want to put a bow on this. The New York Times says, in seeking to control the Fed, Trump risks upending a pillar of the global economy. We are truly in uncharted waters, folks, with a guy at the helm who absolutely should not be. This is an incredibly dangerous time, not just for the economy writ large, but ultimately for your finances, because the Federal Reserve setting interest rates, when and where and how they do it, yes, that has a direct impact on you and your loved ones. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.